Hello, my name's Vicky from the Spellbound Bead Company, and in this video I'm going to show you how to make this simple rainbow peyote tube bracelet. To make each peyote tube you're going to need 40 Delica beads. You're going to need approximately 70 centimetres of thread. I'm using Nymo D in a neutral colour here. You can use whatever you like. So if you're doing a project and you've got a length of fine line left over that it's a bit too big to just throw away but not really long enough to do anything else, it's great for using up your odds and ends there. And then I've got a size 10 beading needle that I use that will go through the Delicas more than easily. I've tied a keeper bead about 10 centimetres or so from the end of the thread. This will just stop the first row of beads that we're going to put on from falling off, and it will help us to maintain a nice even tension for the first 2 rows. So I'm going to start by picking up 8 Delicas. Oh, doesn't want to play. Oh. Now this is even count peyote because I've picked up an even number of beads to start with. Okay, so I've brought those down towards the keeper bead, and I'm now going to pick up a bead. I'm going to miss that first bead and I'm going to go in through the next bead along, like so. I'm going to pick up one, miss one, and go through the next bead along. Pick up one, miss one, through the next bead along. Pick up one, skip one, go through the next bead along. Now as you're coming out of this last bead, just be careful you don't catch the keeper bead thread or go through the actual keeper bead itself, because that will stitch it into your project, which is obviously something you want to avoid. So there we go. So that's the 3rd row of peyote stitch complete there. So you've added the first 8 beads that you put on qualify as row 1 and 2. So we've just added row 3. We're going to keep going until we've got 10 rows in total, or if it's easier for you to count, you can count 5 beads up either side of the strip of peyote. So these little tubes are also great if you want to do things like audition colours against one another. If you want to see if a particular colour combination is going to work, if the beads are going to stand out against one another, if the finishes are going to work together, just make yourself a little strip of peyote and then zip it into a tube, pop them in a little bowl on your beading table. You can always add a little tag to remind you what the colours you used were if you need to. And when you've got enough for a little bracelet or a longer necklace or something like that, you can string them up, and you've got a nice little reminder of all your projects. So it's something I know quilters do sometimes when they've got little bits and pieces of fabric left from other projects. They put them all in a little stash bucket together, and then when they've got enough, they start sewing them together. So might be a nice little reminder of your favourite projects, or you know, sometimes things that didn't work, or things that you started but didn't quite finish. I don't think that's just me, but it might be. So there we go. So just pausing there for a second, you can see that along this edge here I've got 3 beads, 1, 2, 3, and on this edge here I've got 3 beads, which means I've done 6 rows, so I've got 4 more to do. Oops. Okay, so as you can see, I've now got 5 beads on this side, but only 4 beads on this side. So I need to add another row to this side, and this will be the last row to make the tube. So I'll pick up one and go through. And that's number 2, number 3, number 4. Now I've clearly overestimated how many beads I was going to need for this. It is 40. I've just poured out more than I needed to onto the mat. So there you can see we've got a 10 row peyote piece. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to loosen this keeper bead off so that it's a little bit further away from the work. You can take it off completely at this point if you want to, but I like to keep it so that I know where the first bead I put on was. And what we're going to do now is we're going to roll this piece of work into a tube and zip it together. So we're going to come through this bead here and we're going to zigzag across to work. So I'm just going to bring it round into a tube so that the two sides are sitting next to one another, and I'm coming out of this bead on the right and I'm going to go into this bead on the left. So we'll go in and across, like so, and then we'll zip across and across. Just make sure you don't catch your thread as you're doing this. And across. Oops. Now just bear in mind that when you come out of this last bead here, you still need to attach it to this bead here. So you can do that with a square stitch and just make sure it's nice and secure, because when you thread these beads, it's going to be when you thread these beaded beads, it's going to be these beads on the end that are going to sort of take more of the wear. So we'll come back up and we'll zip back up through the seam just to make it nice and secure. Like so. And then I'm going to finish off the thread ends. So I'm just going to come back in through a couple of beads. I'm going to loop round on myself, so I'm going to go back up through that bead that's sitting next to the one I've just come out of. Back down that first one and through there, and then I'll get my scissors and I'll trim that tail. And then I've got enough thread here to make another tube. So what I was doing with the other tubes I've made is I was just continuing to work, and then I've left all the threads with the keeper beads on, and I'll sew them all in together when I'm finished. Right, to show you what I'm doing here, I'll take the keeper bead off this end of the thread. Whoops. Rethread the needle. And then finish off this thread end in exactly the same way as we've just done on the other end. So to make my bracelet, I'm going to need 12 tubes in total. So I'll just make another couple and I shall be back with you to show you how to string them together. So as you can see, I've now got all 12 of my beaded tubes finished. I found a little love bead in my stash as well, and some facets, and I've also got these little washer shaped spacers that I'm going to use in between the tubes just to add a little bit of length. I'm going to use a lobster clasp and a 6mm jump ring, a couple of oval jump rings, some French crimps, and I'm using tiger tail to string this on because it's only quite a short necklace. I just found an odd length knocking around, so that's what I'm going to use. So I'm going to start by separating these two oval jump rings. No, I'm just going to need to twist them open with the pliers. So I've got a pair of flat nose and a pair of round nose pliers here as well. So we'll just twist that open. Make sure it's properly closed. Do the same with this one when I've got the pliers in my hand. And then I'm going to put a crimp onto the end of the wire. I'm going to go through one of the oval jump rings. And I'm going to come back through the crimp there. Now the reason I'm not attaching the clasp directly but with an oval jump ring is because if I decide in the future that I want to change the clasp for a different style, if I want to change it for a toggle or a press stud fastener or something like that, I can do it without having to restring the whole bracelet. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with one of the spacers because it will just protect the end of the beadwork. So I'll pick up one of those, we'll go through a tube, a spacer, a tube, a spacer, a tube. Now obviously I'm arranging these in the colours, in the colour order of the Beadworkers Guild logo, because this video is part of the International Beading Week theme. But you can have these in any colour you like. You could have them all in the same colour. You can do stripes. You could do black and white. You can do anything you fancy really. Right, so that's the first half of the bracelet strung. So I've put a spacer on. I'm going to use a 6mm facet, a little love motif. There we go. Another facet. Now, obviously, I've designed this to fit my wrist. If your wrist is smaller than mine, you can either make less tubes or you could make your tubes shorter. So you could pick up either 6 beads or 4 beads when you start the first strip of peyote, and that will make you a shorter bead. I wouldn't go any less than 10 rows around though, because otherwise it's going to be a bit tricky to zip up. You could make, if your wrist is longer, or if you want to make a necklace instead, then obviously you can make more beads. You can make longer beads. You can do it however takes your fancy. Right, so that's all of the beads strung. I'm just going to slide this down and make sure that this end of the tiger tail sits inside that first tube, so that way it's not going to be rough against your neck. So that's that. I'm going to put a crimp onto this end, and I'm going to go through that oval jump ring, and I'm going to go back through the crimp like, oops. So I'm going to bring that down so that it sits up against the start of this bracelet. Now, if you've got a spacer or something that's got a particularly large hole in it, you can just use a little scrap of paper to sit against this washer, and it'll just stop the crimp disappearing. I don't need to do that because the hole isn't terribly big in my spacer. We'll just pop that through there and through that bead. Come out this side. And then we're going to pull that down so we've got a nice neat loop. But before we crimp anything, we're also going to make sure that this bracelet will actually sit in a wrist shape, because what a lot of people do is they snug everything up and then they crimp it and don't realise that you actually need a little bit of space between your beads for it to be able to curve. So now I'm happy with that. I'm just going to squish that crimp flat. There, make sure it's nice and squished. And then with a pair of scissors, now these are not my favourite embroidery scissors, I'm going to cut that tiger tail. And I think I started with 1/2 metre, so there's enough there to make another bracelet if you wanted to. I'll just pop that to one side and the spare crimps, and then we'll just add the clasp. So we're going to find where the join is in the jump ring, and we'll twist that open, and we'll hook on the lobster end and twist that closed again. I'll then do the same thing on this other end. So we'll twist it, we'll hook the jump ring on, and then we'll close that back up again. And there we have a completed rainbow bracelet. I hope you enjoy. I hope you found something useful in the video, and we'll see you again soon.